Before we begin today's episode, a brief content warning. We're going to be looking at 2 Season 5 episodes today, Schizogeny and Chinga. Schizogeny does contain depictions of child abuse, while Chinga is a more violent and gory than average X-Files episode, so do bear that in mind if you're watching along at home. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Things Getting Strange, an X-Files Rewatch podcast. I'm Nick.
And I'm Kim.
And we're, as usual, bereft of news again.
Yeah, I haven't got any gossip this week either, sorry.
No novels, no events that we're aware of at least.
If you do have anything you'd like us to talk about at the start of a future show, do hook me up on Twitter and just let me know. I'm happy to give you a shout out for any X-Files kind of content, events, upcoming novels, fan fictions, contests, whatever you've got on the go.
But since we don't have any of that this week, I suppose we're going to have to rush over to an orange grove. I don't want to go to this orange grove.
It was a hazelnut grove, I think.
It's a hazelnut grove. I don't want to go there either. So, the episode, which we were pronouncing completely wrong, it turned out, so it's schizogeny, isn't it?
Schizogeny, yeah.
Schizogeny.
It's something to do with cellular division in plants, but I didn't really understand the explanation, to be honest.
Yeah, talking about cavities, and it has nothing to do with this episode as far as I'm aware.
No.
So, directed by Ralph Hemmicker and written by Jessica Scott and Mike Wallager, their first for the series. Broadcast on the 11th of January 1998. Guest stars! Hey, we have Sarah Jane Redmond, who played Karen Matthews.
Okay.
She was in Hellraiser Hellseeker.
Oh, goodness, we were only talking about that last week.
Blood Rain 2 Deliverance.
Oh, no.
X-Files I Want to Believe.
Okay.
Millennium as a recurring role.
Huh.
Harsh Realm.
Ah.
The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina.
Okay.
And she was also in Aubrey.
Ah.
We also have Miles Ferguson, who played Joey Agostino, who was an F. Emasculata. Weirdly, he was the boy the guy grabbed on the bus right at the very end, when they were actually holding them up. That's him.
Ah.
We also have the biggest name, or the biggest subsequent name, I think, was Catherine Isabel, who was Lisa Biocchi? I'm not sure how to pronounce that surname. Who was, of course, in Ginger Snaps, and Ginger Snaps 2, and Ginger Snaps 3.
As Ginger.
She was also in Josie and the Pussycats.
Oh.
Freddy vs. Jason. And the one you've actually seen her the most, but would have not realised, I think, because I completely missed this one.
Okay.
She's in Hannibal.
Is she?
As Margot Verger.
Oh, of course she is.
Yeah.
I just think of her as being Ginger.
Yeah, but yeah, that's the thing we've probably seen her in most recently. And there's Chad Lindbergh, who played Bobby Rich, was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Okay.
NCIS and Star Trek Picard.
Huh. Do you have a synopsis for this episode?
I do. In Michigan, Bobby Rich gets into an argument with his stepfather, Phil, about yard work. Bobby eventually darts into a nearby orchard to evade Phil, but the latter gives chase. Later, Bobby's mother, Patty, enters the orchard and finds Phil dead, his body almost entirely buried in a mud puddle. A terrified Bobby is next to the body. Mulder and Scully investigate the crime. Scully believes that Bobby killed his stepdad by luring him into a pit trap. Patty repudiates this hypothesis, arguing that when she arrived it looked like Bobby was trying to help Phil rather than harm him. Mulder and Scully meet with Bobby's therapist, Karen Matthews, who tells them that the boy has been physically abused. Despite the evidence to the contrary, Mulder begins to believe that Bobby is innocent. Bobby meets up with his classmate Lisa. Just like Bobby, Lisa attends therapy sessions with Matthews, claiming her father Eugene is abusive. Bobby tells Lisa that she should not take any more abuse from him. When Lisa returns home, her father angrily tells her to stop seeing Bobby. Suddenly, a mysterious arm-like appendage bursts through the window and yanks him outside. The next day, Scully examines the body and concludes that he was pushed out the window. Mulder, however, thinks he was pulled. While examining Eugene's corpse, Mulder finds a splinter in his neck, the wood of which matches the trees outside his house. While they continue to investigate the crime, Mulder and Scully are approached by a mysterious man, who claims that a bad man is killing the area's trees. While this is happening, Matthews takes Lisa to her house, claiming that she is protecting her. After Lisa overhears Matthews arguing with a man, she journeys into Matthews' root cellar, where she finds a corpse. When she tries to leave, she finds she has been locked in. Mulder later discovers that Matthew's father was retrieved from a mud puddle 20 years before the events of the episode. He begins to suspect her of wrongdoing, suspicion that is furthered after he digs up her father's empty coffin. Later, the mysterious man from before tells Mulder that Matthew's father's death ended a blight that had been killing trees in the town. Lisa's aunt journeys to Matthew's house to retrieve her niece, but is killed by Matthew, who is revealed to have a split personality engendered by abuse from her own father. This has also given her the power to control the trees in the area. Mulder and Scully later search Matthew's house and find a mysterious corpse in the basement, who they realise is the body of Matthew's father. They also find an unharmed Lisa. Meanwhile, Matthews goes to Bobby's house and chases him into the orchard. The agents arrive soon after, and both Mulder and Bobby are nearly drowned in mud. The mysterious man appears and cuts Matthew's head off with an axe, ending her power over the trees.
Thank you.
This is just terrible. I know you say every episode is someone's favourite, but does anyone like this one?
I'm sure there must be someone. Everyone's well, yes, you just said it. Every episode has to be someone's favourite, but it should be noted that in polls of fans, this episode often either tops or is otherwise just mentioned as one of the worst episodes overall of The X-Files.
Yeah, I mean, you can't get past the premise is pretty weak, the villain's really weird, and all you come away from it really is killer trees.
It was known on set as the Killer Tree episode.
Yeah. And it's really weird because that's only sometimes, because it's kind of like the mud kind of is the trees, but it's kind of the roots pulling the people down into the mud. But then, I mean, so we backtrack a bit though, and it's like one of the parts of the summary is the mysterious man who just wanders around the episode with an axe, and that's just fine apparently.
And talking portentously about how the death of a man once stopped a similar blight.
Yeah, and then he's a literal Deus Ex Machina in this, because he shows up to cut her head off at the last second. Not that it's obvious her head has been cut off in the episode.
No, I didn't realise that till you said it.
No, but I do realise on reflection it's because you see her head sinking to the ground and her body is still sinking when they pull everyone else out of the mud.
And then apparently he gets away with this as well.
Yeah, I would say there's no shot of him being arrested, and they even recycle the footage of him lurking at the end of the avenue of trees in Sum Up, and it's, did you not shoot any other footage of this guy? Who is he? Why does he have an axe?
He just doesn't seem to be connected to anything.
He doesn't. I did also notice in some of the reviews is that people were really unimpressed with Mulder's attitude in this episode, and it's odd, isn't it, that this is one of the major freelancer scripts. So this is a spec script that was given to the X-Files rather than one they commissioned or one from the staff writers.
Yeah.
And the other instance we know of, the other very famous instance, is the one that became Final Destination.
Yeah.
And you kind of look at it and say Final Destination thankfully morphed into something else, but it's really odd that someone would submit an X-Files script and have Mulder make these really callous jokes. It's kind of like the broad impression of you haven't actually watched the X-Files and you're trying to write an X-Files script, so Mulder's mocking the dead and Scully is skeptical of everything.
Yeah.
And then Scully also believes this therapist without question, despite all the other people who are disagreeing with her. And yes, Mulder's whole theory is nuts, but the fact that Mulder has to point out that when that window's broken, the glass is inside the room. That was kind of like a twist that got resolved in like 19th century stuff, is where crimes of the glass is on the wrong side of the window is a major plot point in old stuff. This is meant to be old hat at this point.
It is something that a lot of people know.
Yeah.
Obviously, because you've seen it in a lot of old crime things.
Yeah. And it's the kind of thing you shouldn't be able to get away with this anymore, because this should be an obvious thing that everyone knows. Yeah, if the glass is on the inside, the force came from outside the window.
Mm.
And the fact this has to be pointed out to Scully feels wrong at this point.
Yeah. I did see, for a kind of interesting point that people raised similar to that, is one of the kind of considered goofs of the episode is the bit where Mulder finds the bit of tree root in the body's neck, is the fact that two forensic scientists have looked this body over, neither have found it, and Mulder just goes in and says, "What's that?" Is what kind of background do these people have in forensics if they can miss a huge hunk of wood in the side of someone's neck.
Yeah, and it's a substantial splinter, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not something little. It's something Mulder can see from a distance, in fact. But these people have supposedly fully inspected the body.
Yeah, and I think connected to that, because then Mulder walks into the scene where Scully's talking to Bobby, and she's sort of like taking his jacket off, she's looking at his arms, she can't see any injuries on his arm, there's no scratches on his jacket. But Scully's mindset is, this kid did it. And it's... Scully already said he couldn't have pulled him out the window.
Even Scully notes the fact that there was nowhere for him to stand on the second floor outside the window.
But she's convinced it's him, because Karen told them that he was the one who... Well, he was being abused and he's lashed out at his father.
Though, at the same time, Mulder is suspicious of Karen from the outset because she's got mud on her shoes, when they all live in a flipping orchard that's very wet and rainy outside.
But then that's the kind of Sherlock Holmes detail that he doesn't tell anyone.
Yeah.
And it's really odd that he doesn't tell anyone that.
Because it's lunacy. Walking through that orchard, their shoes would be muddy.
Well, yeah, I know. But as you said, that's what gives him a suspicion, but he didn't bother to tell anyone.
And the fact she's shady as.
Yeah, she is deeply suspicious. However, you know I jokingly said last week we need to have a why hasn't Mulder been fired this week?
Yeah.
So, I am starting to feel we actually do need to do this, given we've got grave robbing.
Literal grave robbing.
Literally digging up a grave, no sanctions, no authority, no equipment, and Scully's just standing there. Scully, do we have to mention Irresistible again? Because you freaked out in that episode.
That was a woman, though.
That was a woman. Of course, I forgot about the whole sexism rampant through all this. But still, I'm pretty sure this is kind of feels minor after waving a gun in the doctor's face, but Mulder should probably be sanctioned, fired, fined, something for digging up a grave in the middle of the day with no authority.
It must be alright if the grave turns out to be empty, as it does.
I don't think that counts.
Technically, he didn't desecrate anything.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the local authority who probably would take a dim view of it, even if the whole how did the body get out of the grave is deeply weird. And they don't actually get into why she has the body. I mean, I guess it's the whole she wanted revenge on her father and locked him in the basement symbolically, but you've gone a bit far if you're doing that to your father's corpse, aren't you?
It's, I think, just purely that it's very clear that the inspiration for Karen herself is Norman Bates. And Norman Bates has the body of his mother in the chair. Sorry to spoil Psycho for everyone.
I think it's fine.
But it's exactly the same difference as you've got the body of the parent that you are still behaving like it's alive, whereas it's just your split personality kind of talking in the parent's voice the whole time. Exactly the same as Norman Bates.
Yeah, I think I saw a comment from someone that they actually, I think it was the AV Club, criticising that as well. Because it's she's not doing a different voice on set, they've pitched it down in post.
Yeah.
So that's why it sounds actually kind of weird.
It sounds weird, but it's very clearly always her as well.
Yeah, there's not a mystery at all.
Not like,
Psycho.
Well, Mrs. Bates and Norman Bates being the same person, it was a huge twist when Psycho was released. I know everyone knows that twist now.
Yeah.
It's possibly the best known movie twist of all time.
It's up there with Empire Strikes Back, I think.
Yeah.
Empire Strikes Back is the more pop culture, the current pop culture one, but yeah. Karen's a weak villain because her motivation is absolutely bonkers.
It doesn't make sense. It
No.
feels like it should make sense, but
it
when you
actually-
break it down, because she's projecting her own admittedly horrible child abuse onto the kids in her care, but on that basis, she's trying to get them to stand up to their supposed abusers, even though there's not really a lot of evidence that any of the kids are actually abused, at least not to the degree that she's making out.
Well, I would go a bit further. I think there's no evidence of abuse at all. You've got very, very basic dynamics between a rebellious teen and their father.
I think arguably it depends how much she's got inside Bobby's head, because Bobby does say, my stepdad knocks me around.
Yeah.
And the mum denies it and says, oh, no, that never happens. But that's the common thing in abuse, is the mothers deny it, and it did actually happen to the kids. So it's either she's got in Bobby's head and he's done nothing, but Bobby's memories are messed up because of this, or legitimately he is knocking Bobby around, but not to the degree she's kind of portraying.
Yeah, and there's
Her argument about him being locked in the cellar, for example, it turns out late in the episode, is something that happened to her, not him.
Yeah, and I would also say I think that there's not enough to deal with that in the episode, and it you can't avoid the thing that Bobby basically stops being relevant to the episode for like a quarter of the runtime and only comes up at the end. He basically sits out a good chunk of this episode.
I have problems with the portrayal of Bobby in general because I feel it's kind of like the writers had this idea of what a delinquent teenage boy would be like without actually having seen any teenage boys.
Yes, you had a good comparison to that.
Yeah, in my head, when I was thinking it through, he reminds me a lot of is it Christian Slater's character in The Heathers? They're both filled with similar kind of character. They've got the similar life outlook, but Christian Slater's character in The Heathers is a compelling character. This character feels like a parody of that.
Well, I'd say also Christian Slater is immensely charismatic in Heathers. Like, you can see how he got Winona Ryder to do what she did, even if some of it is purely accidental.
Whereas Bobby has all the charisma of a shoelace.
Yeah, and why Ginger has the... just think of her as Ginger. It's very hard to shake this one, but...
Lisa.
I know, but why Ginger just gives him the time of day is beyond me.
To be fair, half the time she seems terrified of him, and it's quite legitimate given he's portraying himself as, yeah, I've just murdered my stepdad, even though he did nothing of the sort.
I suppose that's the other thing, is Bobby's portrayal is really weird, given you get the impression he's been a long-term outsider, but he's somehow befriended the pretty girl when it feels like they could be childhood friends and they've drifted apart or something and they're coming back together. The relationship doesn't feel right.
No.
It feels you've
like they'd
shortcut.
be two people in different circles.
Yeah, and you can see him now using his new status to try and get close to her, but that's not how they're depicted. They're depicted as being friends in the current, and now she's afraid of him.
Yeah.
One tiny detail I sort of quite liked, but they used none of the audio, is Bobby is playing Against the Odds MDK at the start of the episode.
While listening to Rob Zombie.
We'll listen to Rob Zombie. But the sound effects in the game have been replaced. MDK, for those who don't know, is a game by Shine Entertainment, who I don't think exists anymore, but was a very strange third-person shooter in a deliberately surreal world where you had things like the world's smallest nuclear bomb to blow up obstacles. And it would actually generate a tiny mushroom cloud when you let it off.
I do remember the game being released, but I've never played it.
It's deliberately comedic, because you play a janitor.
Okay.
Because basically, it's, aliens are invading the Earth. This scientist has developed this wingsuit so you can drop from orbit down to go and fight the aliens and destroy them. And the only person who can get to do it is the janitor who works in his lab. So you're a janitor with a sniper suit thing, shooting things. And the game was at one point called, or is alleged to be called Murder, Death, Kill, hence MDK. I got into so much trouble, they dropped the words and it became just MDK, and they gave suggestions for other things those letters could stand for.
Fair enough. Interestingly, leads into the one thing that made Fox censors Bork in this episode.
Yeah.
Which is kind of hysterical. There's only one thing in this episode that had to be edited out, and it is a very unconvincing overdub from David Duchovny that does it, is Bobby's nickname.
Yeah.
Good old Dorkweed.
Very biting wit there we got from Mulder.
Yeah. His nickname was something a little more offensive, though still mild. And I'm surprised that, given how much we've gotten away with the X-Files in the past, that's what couldn't get past censors.
This is the thing that the South Park film mocked. Of their acceptability, bad language is actually ranks weirdly high versus other things, and it's absurd. I mean, you remember we watched... This film has not yet been rated.
Yeah.
And they showed the examples of how the certification went, and it's for cartoony violence and even sort of quite graphic violence actually gets quite low, but any amount of sexual activity bumps things up very high.
There was an interesting one where it showed two conflicting sex scenes, and
Yeah.
one was violent and one wasn't.
Oh, well, there was a straight and also gay.
No, the one thing, one was quite violent and the other wasn't, but the non-violent one showed a little more pubic hair, so that's the one that got heavily censored.
Yeah, exactly. And this all feeds back into the same loop of this is what the standards and practices, which is a thing we don't have in this country. It's one of the things we hear about, because we usually hear it in the context of stupid things like Gravity Falls, where Alex Hirsch had an ongoing skirmish with standards and practices.
Yeah.
And just the weird things they fixated on and said, you can't have X. And he said, why?
When you think of it in terms of the X-Files, though, is that one word being edited out, but as we'll see later in today's show even, the opening of Chinga is horribly violent, and that's fine, apparently.
Well, I'll offer another weird one, was Hannibal, and it's an infamous occasion in this one. So do you remember the one where they've been skinned and they've kind of made into angels praying around the bed. They were fine with that, except for one frame where the angle was too low down and you could see the corpse's buttocks.
Oh, so the skinning was fine.
The skinning was fine. They just had to reframe a bit so you couldn't see the bare buttocks, and went through.
America, why?
I don't know why. I noticed we keep drifting off of the episode because there's not much to say, because it's not a good episode. There's not much to it. You've got weird flirting, like Mulder climbing up that tree and then kind of flirting with Scully, and then Mulder not being able to hear a conversation happening 5 foot beneath him.
Well, trees blot out a lot of sound.
They really do, apparently. It's like, what is going on?
The thing that gets me about this episode is the use of the subject matter, which is something we've discussed before in terms of the way X-Files treats violence against women. But in this case, it's child abuse. So you've got what should be a very heavy, very dark plot, but you kind of take all the impact away from that by just having Karen and her motivation being utterly ridiculous and a plot wrapping around about trees killing people.
Well, I'd also add that her power is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because I think someone did speculate, did this inspire The Happening? And The Happening is, well, The Happening is also terrible, but at least it doesn't have the trees physically attacking anyone, which is, I mean, the only time I've seen that done, I don't know, I would not want to say well, because what the implication is, but Evil Dead made evil trees a viable threat.
That scene's just uncomfortable, though.
Indeed, but both Evil Dead, so the tree as a threat actually works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, even at the end when it sort of actually sees the demonic tree and everything. I know it's deeply uncomfortable, but at least there's something there, whereas the X-Files, you actually don't even see the trees attacking anyone. It's just like a fragmentary impression of it.
One day I will review my favourite British equivalent X-Files series of Strange for That's Evil Tree episode. But compare and contrast, that's more hysterical.
Yes. Well, this wasn't meant to be, was it? And the other thing I think is that sting of Bobby's father drowning in mud is, no matter how you try to play it off, it's really obvious to the audience what's happening at the start of the episode, and that undercuts everything that happens after that point.
There's no mystery when our argument is supposed to be, did Bobby drown him or was he trying to save him? He was trying to save him. It's obvious.
And also, when did he have time to dig this pit trap?
Even if you dug a bog trap like that, it wouldn't act like quicksand, which is how it appears in this either.
Yeah.
The speed that Dad goes down into this pit.
Yeah. And also, I think, again, for the audience, the whole making it clear it wasn't his plan is that he dives off and hides around the corner whilst the father blunders into it. If you were leading him into a trap, you'd be on the other side of the pit goading him on.
Waving him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not going to hope he stumbles into it by chance.
The way it sets up after it, though, it sets up as though it should be a procedural X-Files episode, even though it doesn't really
No.
work that way. Because you've got things like the mystery of how he has so much mud in his stomach, that Scully gives this bizarre explanation of if you open your mouth in mud, it acts as a vacuum, which I'm not sure would work that way. Yeah. I think you wind up with your lungs full of mud rather than your stomach on that basis. And Mulder noticing the bruise on his ankle, which for some reason Mulder decides is a massive clue, which technically it is, but...
This one is actually weird because we've had it before where Mulder has clearly been reading the script. This isn't even Mulder reading the script because he doesn't get to the right answer fast enough. This is Mulder, I don't know, being given hints by the production staff. Makes me think of that. Do you remember Spaceballs?
Yeah.
There's a scene towards the end of it when they're having the equivalent lightsaber fight where they pivot just slightly wrong and he ends up killing a cameraman.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like the camera crew are sort of muttering to Mulder just off camera or something, which is a whole new weirdness we've got to.
But then moving on from this, how our procedural goes from there, we have all clues leading us to this child psychiatrist, because literally everyone seems to be connected to her as we go.
Yeah.
For different reasons. And she gives an overblown story for each of these kids that doesn't seem to match up with what we see in their home lives, which should make us, even Scully, be more sus of this woman the entire time. But wrapped around there, we keep getting these scenes with mysterious axe guy talking about the sickness that's killing off the hazel trees, which seems to make hazel trees bleed because we just needed to be that bit more gothic.
Yeah. Well, two things off that was the blight thing is it's was it purely the fact the guy was a child abuser was why the trees had the blight? Does that mean that near all child abuse people, blight happens? And then I don't understand how that works with Karen, given she wasn't abusing kids. She was making.
Technically speaking, she was abusing kids.
She was abusing kids, but not in the way that it was done to her. She was making them retaliate against their would-be abusers, or alleged abusers.
She was essentially projecting herself onto these kids, and making them believe that they were abused to get them to stand up to their supposed would-be abusers.
Yeah.
We only really see it twice in the thing, was Lisa shouting at her dad just before he's pulled out the window.
Yeah.
And Bobby turning on his stepdad with a spade very briefly before he gets cold feet and runs off into the woods.
Yeah. And so it's that I don't understand how that connects back to the previous one of the child abuse causing blight. When you say it out loud, that's just bizarre.
It's because the sick tree plot doesn't really tie into anything.
No. The other thing that maybe you've made me realise is Karen is allegedly this person who has manipulated these two kids, and possibly others. We only see two patients, so we assume it might just be these two, but has successfully manipulated them, done whatever psychological tricks she's done to make them both think their fathers are abusive.
Yeah.
This would presumably require high-level intelligence, a lot of coordination, a lot of making sure you know what they're going to say to people at the relevant time. You have a lot of control over them. However, as soon as she locks Lisa in her root cellar, her behaviour couldn't be more suspicious, with people saying, "Oh, where's Lisa?" And her cover stories are so flimsy.
She went to the bus station.
It's like when she says that to the aunt, and it's a case of, did you not think that maybe you could mimic or try and mimic her voice earlier, or send a message to the aunt so she doesn't turn up at the house? It just feels.
Where's Lisa? Oh, she's gone to the station to meet you. We
That's
said we were going to meet here. Oh, I don't know what to tell you. Shuts the door.
This is not a master criminal or anything, but she has to have done this, I think, and set all this up. And
also, attacking the aunt doesn't really make sense, because previously she's tried to get these kids to stand up to their parents through this misplaced revenge. When they failed, she stepped in and killed the parent. The aunt's done nothing. All the aunt did was notice that the girl was held captive and get speared by a tree root.
Yeah. The other thing, and it's possibly unfair to say this, is what is Karen's endgame? After she's convinced Bobby to kill his father and convinced Lisa to kill her father, what does she want?
I expect it's much on the psychopath of she's just going to keep doing this.
Yeah. But there's no sense of it either, because presumably she'd have to keep finding patients, and since she's kind of got old of Lisa, she's just leave her to rot in the basement? I guess so, but I don't know. Does she just...
And has completely given up on Bobby by this point.
Yeah, it's... I think there was a comment about how Christmas Carol and Emily had to be done very, very fast, and Kits and Nagari had to be done very fast. Is this the whole, we've wasted too much time with the film, we need to pad this season, and they just grabbed whatever they could?
It's bizarre because, while I don't think it has been the worst episode so far, that's clearly Tessos Despedichos.
Yeah.
Schizogeny just doesn't make sense, and it doesn't seem to achieve anything it sets out to do, because it's not tense, it's not scary, it's not moving.
Nope. You've got the literal dramatic error of having Guy with Axe show up at the last second to kill the boss.
So not even Mulder or Scully manages to take out this woman.
No. And the nature of her powers is extremely unclear.
She controls trees, that's about all we can do. And literally any part of the tree, it seems, given we have somebody grabbed by roots and somebody grabbed by branches in there.
But I think the episode also handwaves away of how she can do this, why she can do this. I mean, I know in a lot of other episodes, the exact nature of how they've wound up with this ability is always a bit fuzzy, but like DPO, to take another example, is he was struck by lightning and got lightning powers. Fair enough.
And on the other end of the scale, you have the likes of Fire and Tombs, who you presume they've always been this way.
Yeah. And since you mentioned Tessos Despedichos, we can also point out that had the bizarre red herring of the guy who was taking the drug all the time, who had nothing to do with the killer cat bit.
Wasn't the drug just something like mescaline, though? It wasn't something mystical or
It wasn't
like
mescaline, it was something else, but they reacted like it was some hardcore stuff, and I think you said that...
It was just like cactus juice.
Yeah, that's just really mild. I would say, should we hasten away from this episode, but I know you're not going to enjoy what comes next anymore.
I think we've largely covered everything just because there's not much there.
Yeah, it's like a few other episodes when you get down to it, it's not even character stuff though, it's just stuff happened and the episode ran for another time and it was quite tiresome to sit through again.
It does have the bizarrity of Mulder's train of thought in this one, because we've said before that Mulder often feels like he's read the script, but this time he really hasn't. Because he seems on the right track for ages, and then when we get to the crunch, it turns out he's completely misinterpreted what's going on. Because Mulder seems to go on the basis of the abused victims are somehow controlling the trees. He completely misses it's the therapist, even though every step of the way he seems to be suspicious of her.
Yeah, I mean, again, it strikes me, and given these are writers who are outside the norm, is it something written by someone who hasn't actually watched the X-Files and assumes they understand how it works?
There was only really one nice scene in it that I liked, and unfortunately it didn't have the grounds to make it satisfying because, as you say, we ignore Bobby for large chunks of this plot. I kind of like the bit where they finally got onto the track of Kevin, the villain, because Mulder just sat down with Bobby and takes him seriously for the first time, doesn't dismiss what he says, at which point Bobby opens up and kind of says, my therapist made me do this.
Yeah.
If there had been more focus on Bobby and more kind of impression of Bobby being ignored and being disregarded because he was a kid previously, that would have been quite a nice scene.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
But it's another example as well, which some writers don't get, of Mulder is very good at talking to people.
Yeah.
So Scully, with her dismissal and being adamant that Bobby's the killer, can't get the information they need to solve this, but Mulder can by empathising with him.
Yeah. I mean, that does actually lead me to an ongoing thing we've had for this season, at least, is the show Bible. And do the outside people get access to it, or is, again, this a failure of Chris Carter, who should have very thoroughly gone through the script and fixed the inconsistencies?
It's something I'll get into in the next episode, but based on something I read about the creation process of Chinga, I don't believe people outside do get access to the Bible.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. And but we'll talk about it in a minute, because that's interesting what happened with Chinga, isn't it? Very, very curious what happened to Chinga. And it's the fact that it happened to Chinga and doesn't happen to other ones is suspicious to me.
Yeah. Do you have anything more to say about Schizogeny?
I do not. I would like to run away and let's go to Maine.
Good old Maine.
Good old Maine.
Where nothing bad ever happens.
Unless you happen to be in a Stephen King novel.
Yeah, which, interestingly...
So, Chinga. Directed by Kim Manners, written by Stephen King and Chris Carter. Wow. Feels inevitable, but it's actually kind of a surprise he's here.
Yeah.
First broadcast on the 8th of Feb 1998. Guest stars. Okay, so the guest stars went a bit differently because Wikipedia had only one person of note on it, at least one link that's all went to anyone else's page. So I turned to one of the fan wikis.
Okay.
And basically it turns out the people in this have all been in other X-Files episodes or Millennium.
Ah.
So, guest stars, we have, obviously, Larry Musa, who we've talked at length about.
Yay.
Detective Banners. This time he is Captain Jack Bonsant. He lost a show up in Millennium for one episode. We have William McDonald, who played Deputy Buddy Riggs, who's been in Fallen Angel, The Host, Too Shy and Unrary.
Ah.
And will also show up in Millennium. Henry Beckman, the unnamed fisherman, was in Squeeze and Tombs as the elderly detective.
Mm-hmm.
Dean Ray, who played Rich Turner, who, not sure who that was, but he was in Oubliette. Gordon Tipple, who was the assistant manager of the supermarket, has been in Eve, Young at Heart and Humbug.
Ah.
Harrison Coe, who played Dave the Butcher, was in Apocrypha. And Ian Robinson was the Ranger, who was in Never Again.
Ah. Surprising.
Very surprising. There's a whole load of consistent people. I mean, we don't normally get this because normally there's other guest stars to look at. So, would you like to give us a synopsis of the Cursed Doll story?
Yeah. Our episode this time takes place in Amherst Beach in Maine. We see a young mother, Melissa Turner, taking her young daughter Polly into a store. Polly is carrying an old doll with her, which she calls Chinga. The customers watch Polly and her mother, and Polly doesn't like it, insisting that they leave. Suddenly, Melissa sees a ghostly vision of the store's butcher Dave, badly injured and on the verge of death. Melissa leaves the store terrified, but suddenly as she does so, the doll's eyes open and it suggests that they have some fun. Immediately everyone in the store begins to claw at their eyes, and meanwhile Dave sees a monstrous reflection of the doll and is compelled by some external force to stab himself in the eye, dying instantly. Conveniently, Scully is on vacation in the area and stumbles on the carnage in the store. Realising that something weird is afoot, she phones Mulder, who is also on vacation but is not spending it as wisely. Mulder speculates that such a thing could have been caused by dark magic or witchcraft, while Scully dismisses this and decides to instead watch the store's closed-circuit television recordings to get a better idea of what happened. She notices that, of all the customers in the store, the only ones who have not been compelled to injure themselves are Melissa and Polly. She teams up with the police chief of Amos Beach, Jack Bonsang, who offhandedly mentions that people locally believe that Melissa practices witchcraft. Bonsang tells Scully that Melissa had previously been married to a local fisherman who was found mysteriously dead on his boat when a grappling hook he was using was found plunged straight through his skull. Later in the episode, it's revealed that the Chinga doll was found in a lobster trap while he was out fishing, and he gave it to Polly as a present 3 days before his death. Bonsang also talks more about how the locals dislike Melissa and her daughter, particularly a daycare centre teacher named James Froelich once slapped Polly over her behaviour. Polly was removed from her care shortly afterwards. In the meantime, Melissa and Polly meet with Melissa's friend, a police deputy called Buddy Riggs, who seems to have a thing for her. Melissa confides in Riggs that she's been having horrible visions of people dying that have since come true. This unsettles Riggs greatly, and he suggests that Melissa and Polly use his cabin in the woods to get away from Amos Beach. While they are chatting, we see that Polly asks one of the workers at an ice cream store for more cherries, but is refused. Just at that moment, the doll once again triggers, and the worker's hair gets tangled in the mixing machine. Riggs saves her from death, but in the meantime, Polly and Melissa run away. Scully and Von Sam visit Froelich at her house, and she rather vocally accuses Melissa of belonging to a long line of witches. She also claims that Melissa has passed her evil powers onto Polly. On the way to Riggs's cabin, Melissa sees a bloody vision of Froelich dying and decides to return to Amos Beach to save her. As she rushes back, Froelich is confronted once again by the enlarged spirit of the Chinga and forced to kill herself with a broken piece of phonograph record. Soon after, Melissa sees another vision of Riggs. As Riggs approaches her, believing now that she is a killer, the deputy is forced by the Chinga doll to bludgeon himself to death using his own nightstick. Finally, while at home, Melissa has one last vision. This time she sees herself with a hammer embedded in her head. She decides that the only thing to do is to end everything once for all by burning the Chinga doll and the house. However, as she tries to light the gasoline-soaked kitchen, the doll somehow manages to extinguish every match she lights. Scully and Von Son hurry to Melissa's house and witness her trying to burn it down, with her, the daughter, and Chinga all trapped inside. Chinga eventually manages to overpower Melissa, forcing her to grab a hammer and beat herself in the head. This is just as Scully and Von Son burst into the house. Scully grabs the doll and tosses it into a microwave, where it melts and bursts into flames. Immediately its power over Melissa is lifted and she stops hurting herself. In the last scene of the episode, Scully returns back to work to find a very bored Mulder, and she pontificates on whether or not she can send a copy of his I Want to Believe poster to Von San. In the final moments of the episode, we see another fisherman pulling up a lobster trap. Inside is the remains of a very burned doll.
Thank you. This is a complete catastrophe of an episode.
I mentioned it in previous weeks as well, while I actually like the Chinga episode, I'm also terrified of it. This was one of the first episodes I saw when I started watching The X-Files as a kid, and it scared the bejesus out of 14-year-old Kim.
I would offer it scared the bejesus out. The first scene scared the bejesus out of me. The entirety of the episode felt like it was a comedy.
Yet it's not supposed to be.
No, but I'm still going to go with Gillian Anderson had to be told to knock it off because she thought it was a comedy.
I believe it was she was It's Von San is supposed to be slightly comedic, and from what I read, Gillian Anderson was reading off that and thought that her answers were supposed to be tongue-in-cheek, and had to be told to knock it off because Scully is supposed to be playing this absolutely straight. Larry Moose's character is supposed to be slightly silly.
Yeah, but it tonally, Scully still comes off as funny because of she has to share the scenes with Bonsant, and he's not acting like he's in a Stephen King novel.
It seems to have split audiences and critics, but a lot of people didn't find Mulder's scenes funny either, and I think they are scripted to be funny.
I found them funny.
But a lot of critics kind of commented on the humour falls flat in Mulder's scenes, and that was one of the big criticisms of the episode.
Yeah, I don't have that problem. I saw a note which said this is the inverse of coprophages, and it is, but nowhere near as funny.
It might be part my own internal phobias is I find porcelain dolls very creepy in general, and the Chinga doll was designed quite effectively, I think, by the props department, because it's actually made out of oversized pieces of different dolls to give it this kind of uncanny valley look. Is the head is a lot larger than a standard porcelain doll, and it's wearing a larger wig to make it look even more out of proportion.
Okay.
So you've got that idea of not only is it a creepy doll, but it's been deliberately mismatched to kind of just play with your kind of expectations and seem creepier.
And that works. I mean, before we get into the rest of it, do you want to talk about the writing of this episode, which we alluded to a little while ago, is odd?
Yeah, it was. The kind of backstory of this episode went back to David Duchovny appearing on Jeopardy at the same time as Stephen King.
So many things seem to link back to that one TV show.
But while on Jeopardy, Stephen King approached him and said, "Hey, I'm a big X-Files fan, I'd really like to write an episode." So David Duchovny put him in touch with Chris Carter, who thought this was a great idea.
Makes sense. Horror writer, horror series.
However, in the writing process, Stephen King and Chris Carter never met. And instead, Stephen King sat in isolation and wrote several copies of this script that they then kept sending to Chris Carter and back to him for revisions. But it quickly became apparent that the scripts that King were writing didn't quite work because, although he was a fan and a very accomplished horror writer, he couldn't write Mulder and Scully's characters correctly. So, in the end, the final treatment was written by Chris Carter, and indeed there's a comment somewhere from Kim Manners where he said he was excited to direct a Stephen King episode, but then when he got the script, he said there was not really anything of King there, it just felt like another Chris Carter script. So ultimately the question is how much of King's script actually remains here.
Yeah, and I see what you mean, because it's got the aesthetics and the kind of building blocks of a Stephen King story, and the meat isn't there.
I was thinking through it because I, in my youth, I've read lots of Stephen King stories. I used to be a huge fan when I was a teenager. And the closest I can think where it feels like a Stephen King plot is if you think along the lines of Christine.
Yeah.
You've got the demonically possessed inanimate object that's hurting things around it. But other than the kind of typical main setting, there's not really much else there that feels like a Stephen King story.
Yeah, and I think the bits and pieces that are left over aren't connected together, because I'd forgotten about the lineage of witchcraft thing, which is an absolutely absurd accusation to hear thrown around in the 90s. Even someone like Maine, people aren't going to say this.
I think these kind of areas of America are a bit notorious for still having these kind of beliefs. They're very religious areas.
Okay. It
But
feels weird.
I'm sure you would get people who'd voice it like that. I mean, I used to work with a very God-fearing woman who would voice things like this as well. So in isolation, yeah, but it seems weird her being that vocal to a police officer.
I was going to say that, and also everyone in the supermarket being suspicious of her.
Looking at her side-eye.
Yeah, and it's that feels weird.
I should probably note now as well, the title is rather infamous of this episode.
We're not sure. Yeah, you did explain this to me just before this case. How did this happen? Because this feels... What happened?
I tried to do some research, as I do for all of these X-Files episode titles, as to where the title came from, and I don't know. Is the only use of the word Chinga I can find is its notorious thing is this episode was retitled when it was aired in Spanish-speaking countries because the word Chinga is Mexican Spanish slang and it's a very common one for the word whereas its Spanish title is Bung Honey, which again I googled for and I cannot find the word Bung Honey other than connected to this episode, so I don't know if that has a meaning either. So it's it just must be some obscene coincidence that Stephen King thought, yeah, I'll name the doll Chinga, and it just turned out to be a really offensive word. but at the same time, I don't think we ever say the doll's name.
Nope.
In all summaries, it mentions the doll is called Chinga, but I don't remember the girl calling it that.
No, I don't remember that either. So, coming off the back of this, we have an intentional comedy of the episode. Because I do feel it's trying to be horror, and there are some bits which actually are horrific. But there's a whole lot of stuff that, for one reason or another, doesn't read as comedy to me. I mean, we'll put other stuff to one side for a minute, because Mulder I think we'll deal with as one go.
Mm.
It seems like the effects in this episode aren't up to snuff. Because her visions of people dying look pretty terrible.
The actual visions.
The actual visions look absolutely awful. Like, the first vision of Dave the Butcher in the freezer cabinet of a supermarket looks like a Halloween special effect that you could do today.
Mm.
It doesn't look like a vision of death because it's in amongst the frozen peas.
It is a lot more like those kind of vaguely Pepper's ghostish Halloween decorations you get that project on the screen.
Exactly. That's what it looks like. And also, it's on the frozen food. This is like... I can see what they were trying for, but it's
in fact, I think
hilarious.
The visions always appear on glass in the episode.
They do. And it's like the woman accused of witchcraft is in the rear view mirror of the car. Buddy, I can't remember where Buddy showed up, but it was another pane of glass, and her other one was the exterior window. And they never look right. They don't look like ghostly visions, they look like a bad Halloween effect.
Yeah.
And I feel that undercuts the terror of the episode quite a bit.
But at the same time, you've got how scary the scenes are when you actually see people hurting themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Because both the opening one where everyone in the store starts clawing their eyes out, and the one where Ms. Froelich slits her throat on a record, are both quite intense, scary scenes.
Oh, yeah. I'm not to say they aren't intense scenes, but I'd still equate things to not so much coprophages, but I've seen other things where you can do comedy stuff, have the horrific thing, and then go back to being comedy again. And that's what this episode always felt to me. And Larry Musa is probably the thing that does do that. I mean, the fact he's written to be comedic throws the tone out of whack. He needed to be more serious for this to actually work as a horror episode.
I really liked Mr. Von San.
Oh, so do I, but he doesn't make it a horror episode anymore because it seems like taking Scully out to lunch and having that enormous lobster. You can't read this scene as anything but a comedy.
It's probably been Larry Musa's best role in this, because we've seen him a few times, like in Jose Chung.
Yeah.
But he has so much fun with this role, and he's one of the most enjoyable things to watch in the episode. Just how accepting he is. It's like Scully's taking the Mulder's position, just throwing out the outlandish theories, but he's just accepting it.
Exactly.
It's really enjoyable.
And I think it's that contrast though between him and Buddy.
Yeah.
And Buddy's playing it deadly straight, like you would do in a Stephen King thing. But you've got that contrast.
Yeah.
And I think that's what flags up to me, and presumably it's what flagged up to Gillian Anderson as, this isn't meant to be serious. We're doing a comedy episode.
I guess you've got more in Stephen King's writing. You think of it in the tone of the Stephen King segment of Creepshow.
Yeah.
You've got that kind of slightly hammy, tongue-in-cheek feel to it. And again, we don't know how much of it is King. If he was writing on a slightly comedic bent that Chris Carter's tried to obliterate.
Yeah, and I think he's not done it fully.
Or it's vice versa, and King's tried to write something deadly serious, and Carter's tried to put comedy in. But given that Carter's the one who's told Scully to play it straight,
yeah,
I'd go more that it's King's humour that you're getting in there.
Indeed. I would agree with that, and it puts the episode in a weird no man's land, where it's trying to be terrifying, but then I feel the other problem is that Chinga itself, the doll, it kind of hedges its bet on what it is, because there are no answers for us. Where it's come from, how her father managed to fish it up of all things.
To be fair, that's a very Stephen King way of writing things, is he often doesn't explain it.
True, but it's not how the X-Files does it.
No.
The X-Files is usually meant to introduce an idea of where it came from.
You'd have things like the juju that we see in Fresh Bones, where it explains its roots in voodoo.
Yes, that kind of thing. Whereas the doll is just, oh, I've fished up this doll from the sea, make a good present for my daughter. The hell are you talking about, man? What kind of state is this doll going to be in that you managed to fish it up with the fish and lobsters?
To be fair, if I fished up a porcelain doll, it'd be going straight back in there.
That too, but I mean, wouldn't you think it might... You don't know what's been living in it. How long has it been down there? It looks quite in good shape for something that's been submerged for a long time.
You'd have to absolutely sterilise that thing.
Yeah.
When it's got, like, flax hair as well.
Yeah. And then just how he died is meant to be horrific, but it just feels comedic, doesn't it? It's a case of they heard the faint voice outside, walks out, gets killed with a grappling hook, and then the other fisherman comes out.
I'm not sure why no one suspected the other fisherman either.
Yeah.
Because there's no way in hell a person could drive a grappling hook clean through their skull like that. And indeed, he's even kind of pinned himself to the ceiling with it.
Yeah.
But the fisherman is the only other person on the boat, and yet somehow it's just been chalked up as an accident.
Yeah. What is going on? This is absolutely absurd. And again, I would say the horrifying moment at the end is the mother trying to beat herself with the claw end of a hammer. She does herself remarkably little damage for hitting herself with full force with a hammer.
Multiple times.
Multiple times. I'm not sure she survived this, but she did.
I saw as one of the great goofs of the episode that made me laugh when I read it online as well, was somebody commenting on the fact that Scully's answer is to burn the doll in a kitchen that she can tell is soaked in gasoline. Is why would you do something that emits sparks in that case?
I don't know either. It's also just weird having her jump so fully into the believer role like this. I mean, admittedly, she can quite clearly see that infectious disease in the air is not what's caused a supermarket.
In Scully fashion, she walks straight in there with no mask on as well, even though there's kind of signs of some sort of epidemic.
But the other thing is, they burn the doll, and that sort of seems to break its power.
Mm.
It's the fact that you don't have the scene of her then taking it, driving down to a pier and flinging it into the ocean, and it just shows up at the end there being fished up again. There's a disconnect there. There's a scene missing. You don't feel that there's a logical extrapolation from one to the other.
No, that's true. You could go on the sense, though, it's the kind of campfire story where you throw the cursed doll in the trash and it appears in your bedroom the next day. Is the thing hasn't necessarily been thrown in the sea, but it's made its way into there somehow.
True. But I mean, then, and it has to be the campfire story because it's the whole, they put it in the microwave and it stopped having any influence, and yet it somehow does by the time it gets fished up again.
Let's have fun.
So how many porcelain dolls are fished up in, what am I talking about? Stephen King country, porcelain dolls, fished up in Maine, that's every other fortnight.
It's Maine, they're too busy fighting vampires or things that have been risen in pet cemeteries or that sort of thing.
Pennywise.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was Maine, wasn't it? Yeah.
They nearly all are. You get reoccurring locations of Stephen King like Castle Rock, but they're usually main locations.
Yeah. And it's nice to have a essentially Scully-centric episode. And I do like the fact that for one of the positive things of the episode is she's been paying attention all these years. Because when Mulder says about, have you checked for signs of witchcraft, and she rattles off just an exhaustive list of things, it's a case of, yeah, I've done all these investigations with you, Mulder. I know exactly what kind of things we'd find lying around if this was remotely true.
That's a much nicer than kind of other episodes we've seen when Mulder's had to explain the same concept to Scully over and over again.
Yeah, and Mulder's response is suitably humorous. It's just, marry me, Scully.
Yeah.
That's nice. This is some decent Mulder and Scully flirting for a change.
I also like the portrayal of Mulder in this episode just because we show, as we've kind of inferred before, that Mulder can't switch off. As even on vacation, he's found himself at a loose end with nothing to do.
Well, vacation, but it's also a weekend, so he should be switched off anyway.
Mm.
And then we get the complicated joke of when we first see Mulder in this episode.
Oh, Alien Probe.
Alien Probe. So we cut to Mulder's office. There's a video box that says Alien Probe. There is clearly a man and woman panting quite provocatively on the TV, which we can't see. And Mulder is watching it intently. Rumpled shirt. And then he sort of mutes it at some point after telling Scully he's watching The World's Deadliest Swarms. We get a very brief glimpse of the TV screen as he was switched off, and it is a man covered in insects. It's not impossible, it's still porn, but at least it seems to be in the right kind of general category.
I do like that.
It is a good joke. Just we've already fully accepted that Mulder watches porn in the office. Now he's watching insect snuff in his office.
I like his increasing idle hands as well, because we see him bouncing a basketball in his room, and when Scully asks about it, he hastily says it's construction work outside.
Yeah. And then doesn't cover up quite properly because the ball bounces at any extra time.
And then there's the first example of something that becomes a bit of a reoccurring image of Mulder bored throwing pencils at the roof of his office.
I mean, it is a nice touch that Mulder is that bored, and the fact that he's actually embarrassed because when Scully walks in, he's lining all his pencils up very neatly and then has to hide them.
I also quite like that end bit where Scully asks about the "I want to believe" poster because she presumably wants to. She says she wants to send it to someone she's met, presumably Von San.
Well, she does actually say Jack.
Oh, does she say Jack?
She does say Jack.
Yeah.
So
but there's no story behind it because Mulder just says, "Oh, I got it somewhere on M Street."
yeah. But I do like that. It's a really nice touch, and the fact that Scully would think along these lines. All of Mulder's scenes are fun, and I like the fact he's trying to offer advice and Scully doesn't actually want it.
Yeah.
Which is, when people say it's the inverse of coprophages, that's true because Mulder was often calling Scully for advice, and this one, he keeps bothering her.
See, there's another one that I think it's an interesting counterpart to that isn't corophages. For me, it's Never Again.
I can see that.
When Mulder does not treat Scully like she's competent anyway. He treats her like she's a child and keeps berating her for not doing investigations properly and stuff like that. In this one, Scully shows that she's entirely competent and Mulder respects her.
Yeah. And again, this comes back to that general point that has come. Season 5 has really provoked this more than any other season of what is Chris Carter doing when the characters are behaving so inconsistently?
But this is what I was saying in the last episode, Schizogeny. I don't believe there is a Bible purely on the basis of they said Stephen King couldn't write Mulder and Scully and it had to be rewritten. So you haven't given King a Bible on that basis.
No, and certainly the freelancers didn't get it either.
Because a writer as skilled as Stephen King, if you gave him instructions, I'm sure he'd be able to follow them.
Yeah, I don't buy this not being able to get the voice. It's a case of he's written for loads of TV projects in the past. He's
a best-selling horror author. He's written for TV. He's written for film.
Yeah.
He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, there shouldn't be any way he can't get Mulder and Scully to sound right. Unless you've deliberately said, just send a script over. You know enough as you are. You don't need to look at our thing. Which, yeah, is coming down to there is no central document somehow.
Yeah.
How they've managed to do this. I mean, I'm perfectly willing to be proven wrong, but that then comes back to if the Bible exists, or existed at this point in time, that then comes down to Chris Carter's a lousy showrunner. Because I keep contrasting him back to
Russell T. Davies?
Russell T. Davies, and specifically Russell T. Davies, mostly because I don't really like the next one. But one of Russell T. Davies' things, and how I thought showrunners did it, was you have the final pass on all the scripts, and basically if you're setting up long-running things, you will go in and deliberately change things to continue setting them up or continue hinting at them. You also keep the characterization consistent so that you have everything feels naturally progressive and you don't have characters doing the bizarre shifts the X-Files does to them.
I've got to admit, I liked that in Russell T. Davies' initial run on Doctor Who is the bad wolf thing, because you don't notice it much at first, and then in that final episode where it shows you every time the phrase bad wolf has appeared, you think, oh goodness, yeah, it has been there from the start.
Yeah. Not as wild about some of the later things Russell T. Davies did, don't agree with those, but the whole point is, as far as I understood it, this is what the showrunners are meant to do, is you're meant to keep characterization consistent, you're meant to keep the plot lines consistent, you're meant to set things up and keep like nudging that they're coming or start building towards them, and not have Never Again, which is, we did make a lot about this, and I still could swear blind that Morgan and Wong were trying to burn down the series on their way out because nothing about that episode made sense for the characters. And this one isn't as bad, but it's that point of you've hybridized Stephen King's script into a Chris Carter script, and both of them are kind of at odds with each other.
Yeah. Say for your criticism though, and for my intense fear of this episode, I like this one.
Oh, I do too.
I think it's a very good episode. It's very fun, and it's legitimately scary.
Yes, but then I come from the opposite angle and say it's legitimately funny. Speaking of goofs, I do remember one I saw before.
Mm-hmm.
This is a really weird one.
Okay.
So mum and daughter run off to Buddy's cabin at one point.
Yeah.
And they meet that ranger.
Yeah.
Who says...
Winter's in full force.
Yeah. In the middle of summer, because Scully has a convertible, she's wearing a t-shirt.
However, on the other side of the goof, she's got that convertible with the top down, despite the fact there are thunderclouds overhead as well.
Yeah, I just saw the justification. It's the horizon is clearing, so she might be preempting it. But yes, it's a good point. A better one, and one that we don't get in this country at all, is Scully pumping her own petrol.
Oh, is she at like a service place?
She's at a fully service place, because that's why the bell rings when she pulls in.
Oh, okay.
that's there basically to get someone to come out to your car and
we
do
don't
it.
really have them in the UK, but I know
don't think
they
we do at
exist
all.
in America.
You see them occasionally, we always go, the hell is that?
Mm.
But yeah, she's doing that at a full service place for no
Okay.
apparent reason.
I think the one thing we've kind of skipped over is Polly herself.
Yes, well, I was just thinking about that of she isn't a character.
I do think I will give the X-Files the credit, as we've said that one of the things the X-Files is pretty bad at is portraying mental illness.
Yeah.
And Polly, at least it's inferred by Von Son, might be autistic.
Yeah.
It's not said for sure in the episode, it's just something that Von Son kind of alludes to. But I think this is possibly our best depiction in the X-Files of someone who's neurodivergent, because we're not portraying her as being some kind of savant, which it fell into the trap of with Roland and Elegy, I think.
Yes. This is a good point, and yeah, that's a refreshing change. I think my counter to that would be Polly. At no point in this episode do you get a sense of how Polly was before Chinga.
No.
Like, even at the climax, we don't get that change in behaviour that then indicates the doll's influences stopped, just that her mother stopped beating herself with a hammer.
There are two interesting points, I think, is first of all, Von Son says something about how he doesn't think that she's capable of understanding her dad's dead, but we don't see that either way. She never infers the existence of a father or anything like
she
that.
doesn't say when's father coming home or something.
No. And also, in a long line of kids with the cold dead eyes of a killer is, I'm pretty sure Polly's evil.
Yes.
We say early on, I can't remember which character voices it, but the fact that these kind of cursed objects like the doll infer power on the person holding them.
And Mulder says that.
Which infers that everything that's happening is not necessarily Chinga, it's powers Chinga's giving to the girl. So you've got the mind of a child here who therefore will have a cop bludgeon himself to death because she wants some popcorn.
Yeah.
We're on a level of evil even above that kid that can control the world in the Twilight Zone here.
And we're just gonna say she's fine at the end, because
The only time you see her looking a bit upset is when her mum starts bludgeoning herself to death in front of her.
Yeah.
Nothing else that happens seems to distress Polly in any way.
No, and a lot of it happens after she's already gone. Because like she's not present at all for the teacher, the daycare person killing herself with the record.
And she only sees the start of whatever the hell's happening in the convenience store at the start.
Yeah, and indeed the ice cream place, where one of the most bizarre my hair's been caught in the gears of this thing I've ever seen, where I'm sure her hair gets longer just so it can get tangled.
It is all the way down past her hips to begin with, her hair.
I know, but the way the hair moves is kind of just unnaturally just weird.
That's another scene that really unsettled me as a kid, and, in later life, there's a saw trap that works that way. It is a nasty thing to happen.
But it's just, I think it's everything that's happening around it, in case you've got this ice cream place, it just feels inherently ludicrous.
Yeah.
But I'd say that is a very good criticism of the episode, is Polly released from Chinga's influence. We don't get to see. So rather than having Scully saying, where did you get this poster from, and Mulder messing around with pencils, there should be a scene of how Polly is now. Like Born Again, where we got to see she was now no longer afraid of water. She was a happy 8-year-old.
And no longer had the cold dead eyes of a killer.
Yeah. It wasn't much of a scene at the end of the episode, but it was enough to say Charlie's influence has left her.
Yeah.
And we don't get an equivalent Chinga's influence has left Polly.
Mm.
That's bad. Because, as we said, no sense of how she was different first. Because at least in Born Again, she was like that from birth because she'd been possessed by Charlie from birth. So I can excuse that one. We don't get this one because the doll was given to her relatively recently.
I can't remember how long it said Dad's been dead for, but Dad died 3 days after he gave her the doll.
Yeah. And then you've got to say after that, it's a case of, why did the doll kill Dad? And not kill Mum?
Maybe it got between her and popcorn again.
Yeah.
Or her and cherries. It's largely, I don't want to go to a place, or I would like to eat that, are the two motivators for people dying in this.
But then you've got the outward effect of it are weird, because not wanting to go into the supermarket, okay, then the blame would be on the mother, but then it's people staring at her, but her ire is reserved for Dave the Butcher. Also, people are weirdly judgy about affairs. And it's not even an affair,
It's not even an affair.
Moving on after husband died.
No, it specified that Dave is married, he made a hit on her, and she turned him down. Yeah. So it's entirely on Dave being a bit of a dick.
I suppose it is 6 of them, so of course the woman's fault rather than the man.
But the second one, she doesn't want to go camping, which is arguably Buddy's fault, and she attacks the daycare attendant who slapped her months before.
Yeah, it's, the cause and effect is just maddeningly disconnected from each other.
And fair enough, Buddy got between her and the popcorn.
Yeah.
And the final one was self-preservation because Mom was going to destroy the doll, and therefore that one makes sense.
But the supermarket was she then did it to everyone.
And that's the only time she does do it on a wider scale.
So it's maddeningly inconsistent powers, and the cause and effect of what the doll does is so divorced in places it just doesn't feel correct.
I like the doll's response of, it's like using a hammer or a scalpel would do. Things like, girl wants popcorn, cop gets in the way, kill him. It's the doll has no other remedy other than murder.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem of that kind of supernatural force. You're used to more creative stuff. I mean, they name-check Chucky very blatantly in the episode. Even Chucky has more of a change in how he operates, isn't it? Depending on the situation.
Yeah, but Chucky is possessed by Brad Dourif.
Yeah.
Which makes it massively more entertaining than this.
Oh yeah, but still, Chucky doesn't just kill people in the most... what doesn't manifest as a giant version of themselves, obscured somehow, and then makes them kill themselves.
No. Chucky actually takes matters into his own hands.
Yeah.
And it's usually hysterical.
Yeah. So, it feels odd to invoke Chucky when you're sort of not doing anything like that.
Yeah, but I'm not afraid of Chucky either.
Well, yeah, that doesn't help either, does it?
I even used the argument for Annabelle recently with somebody, despite my own dislike of just completely normal porcelain dolls, they make too much of an effort to make Annabelle look scary, and the result is she isn't.
Well, it's because if you had the real world with air quotes Annabelle, you've got a Raggedy Ann doll, which no one's being scared of.
I don't know. I think that's a lot scarier than the Annabelle they've got in the films.
You're just scared of the animation.
Yeah, anybody who's seen the Raggedy Ann animation is afraid of it. It's a rational fear.
Okay, have we missed anything else out from this car crash of an episode? I do like it.
Car crash, it's great.
Oh no, I would say I do like it. It's not well constructed,
but it's fun.
It is fun. It's not a bad episode.
It's been one of the most enjoyable episodes of the season so far, if I'm honest.
When I say car crash, I didn't mean that as a wholly negative thing. I mean it as a whole
car crash.
Two things smashed into each other.
There's nothing like the good car crash.
This is the good car crash. If you talk to the people in Crash, they have good car crashes all the time.
Yeah, I think we've covered everything, haven't we?
I think so. Next week, we get a more of a coin flip. We get Kill Switch, which is another famous author writes an X-Files script, and yeah, they just went bananas.
Stuff certainly happens.
Stuff certainly happened in Kill Switch. And then, we've been waiting for a long time, Vince Gilligan says, you know what? I'm going to do Rashomon as well.
Oh, is it Bad Blood?
It's Bad Blood.
Yay!
So we'll have plenty to talk about for the X-Files' second true vampire story, which we like a lot more than the first one. In the meantime, though, if you'd like to get hold of us, our email address is thingsargettingstrange42@gmail.com.
Alternatively, you can get us on social media. On Twitter and Tumblr, we are GetStrange42. On Mastodon, we are at GetStrange42 at universedon.com. And on Facebook, you can find us by searching for Things Are Getting Strange, an X-Files Rewatch podcast. Additionally, if you're not sick of my voice by now, I also have a stream over on Twitch TV. It is on Mondays and Wednesdays at 8 PM GMT or Saturdays at 5 PM GMT. I play whatever I'm currently playing on the PlayStation 5. It's currently One Piece Odyssey, though I am, I think, getting close to the end of that now, so we'll be soon moving on to other things.
We have Patreon, patreon.com/thingsargettingstrange, where we have one bonus episode currently, which is us trying, and the emphasis on trying, to review the Mulder and Scully single by Catatonia. But we're in the process of recording our Let's Play of the first X-Files game. We've got part 1 done, and part 2 will be done tomorrow. So we're making better progress.
Hooray!
And that will be available exclusively through Patreon for as little as $3 a month.
It should be noted that we have 3 tiers on Patreon, all at different prices and with different perks attached. But if you back us at any level, you will have access to all the special episodes.
Our theme music is envisioned by Kevin MacLeod. You can find that on incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, please remember,
Let's have fun.